All right. It looks like we're live. Got a few people coming in.
Welcome, everyone.
So I think Beth and I talked about just waiting a couple more minutes until a few more people get here. We had about 20 people sign up, so hopefully we'll get about that many. All right. I'm gonna mute myself. So I am going to have to apologize because I haven't done a webinar in my dining room for a long time. And my cat is sitting here just staring at me and also trying to ruin my computer. So she shows up. I just want to apologize to everyone.
I don't mind a guest appearance.
That's good. Yeah, they're not used to me being up here anymore. This is Pep. So I have 2 cats and a dog, and the cats don't come to the office with me, but sometimes my dog does. So if anyone is a dog lover, just send them our way. Well, maybe we should go ahead and we'll get started. I think a few more people will probably join as the time goes on. We will be recording this though, or we are recording it. So we will send a recording out after the webinar and to all those that couldn't make it. Once again, good morning in Minnesota. It is just after 7:30 in the morning. So Beth and I are up bright and early. Our director will also be joining us in just a few moments. But I would like to introduce Elizabeth Lawrence. She is our international recruitment specialist and our resident expert, maybe actually more than resident. She helps out with a lot of different things. So welcome, Elizabeth, and I'll be here to help out if you need it.
Sounds great. Thanks, Alyssa. And thanks everyone for joining. Feel free if you want to type in the chat box where you're joining from. I'm always curious where we have representation from. If you feel like you want to put that in there, and also throughout the session, if there's any questions that do come up, please feel free to type those in the chat box as well, and we'll take questions and answers at the end of the session. So hopefully the information will be detailed enough, but of course there's always questions and unique situations that come up. So we would love to have a great Q&A discussion at the end of the session. So this topic will be covering financial aid for international students. And I'm going to give you kind of a general approach to financial aid in the United States for international students. So not necessarily specific to Minnesota State Mankato. I will touch on some scholarship opportunities that we offer, but I wanted to give that overview. So depending on your role in advising students, you may be a school counselor, you might be an agent, you might be working with EducationUSA or another Ministry of Education sector advising students on financial aid. So without knowing the levels of expertise that you have, I hope that this is a good introduction to financial aid for international students. But of course, I would be excited to hear from you at the end as well. If you have any additional thoughts or insights or experiences that you've had in working with students and helping them find funding and financial aid, because I know we all can benefit from that, especially during this time. So I just want to introduce our team. So I'll be presenting and sharing the information. Of course, you have met my colleague Alyssa, but I also wanted to highlight a couple other staff in our office who are the main points of contact for recruitment and retention for international students. And you probably have gotten some emails from us through the newsletters. So JC Fry is our director for the Carney Center for International Student Services. She should be joining us a little bit later this morning. And then Hamdi Al-Nuzahi, he's our assistant director for sponsored students. So mainly working with students who are coming from the Gulf countries. And then of course, Alyssa, I don't know if you want to introduce yourself as well, but she's our assistant director for strategic communication and recruitment. So a lot of the email communications that we send out, she's the main person who's making all of the communications and marketing happen, and does an amazing job with that.
Yeah, thank you, Beth. I do a lot with our communications, but we are always trying to innovate and find easier ways for students to understand the process, whether it's with our university or going to a community college and then transferring, or just going anywhere. So if there's a resource that you've been looking for and you haven't been able to find, please feel free to send me an email. My email is there, alyssa.morrison@mnsu.edu. And I would love to put together a resource that you think would be helpful for students, whether it's a digital brochure or videos. We're always happy to help out.
Awesome. Thanks, Alyssa. Feel free to take a screenshot of this as well for contact information, and we can share this at the end again. All right, so for the presentation today, I'm just going to give a brief overview on what is financial aid in the United States, and the types of funding that are available for international students, how students can apply for financial aid, and then also understanding expectations. So managing expectations about being realistic with funding education in the United States, but also what's expected for students to cover as part of the cost of education, what's included in the estimated cost of attendance, and things that students and their financial sponsors, whether it's parents or other relatives, things that they should really be considering while applying to universities in the US and managing their expectations. So financial aid from the US perspective is essentially financial support from a source that's outside of the student's family or personal finances, and it helps fund or pay for the cost of education, whether that's paying for the full cost of education or a portion of it. The main types of financial aid can be summed up basically into three categories: scholarships and grants, which would be money that's given to students based on their academic merits, based on financial need, or other criteria that they have met. But it's essentially free money that students receive and do not have to pay back. And it counts, or it's applied towards their cost of education. So it can be used towards tuition and fees. In some cases, scholarship and grants may help to cover the cost of living expenses or books and supplies or other personal expenses, depending on the package and scholarship or a grant award. Then there are assistantships and fellowships. These tend to be available more often at graduate or postgraduate and doctoral levels for students. But I just want to highlight that these fellowships and assistantships can, in some cases, be available for undergraduate students who may be going to a research institution. In some cases, there are research assistantship positions that have opened up for undergraduate students. It's not as common, but primarily at the graduate level, those types of assistantships or fellowships are available. Those are typically tied to a job or research position at a university or college, where the student would be dedicating maybe 15 to 20 hours per week assisting with teaching assistantships or research assistantships, or doing general assistantships for a student service office, but they would be dedicating some of their time to working at the university in some capacity, and then receiving financial assistance in return for their work. So that would be in the form of a tuition waiver. It could be in the form of a living allowance that helps to cover their cost of attendance. But again, that is financial aid that students are not required to pay back in any form. Then the third type, of course, would be student loans. This is the source of funding that I know a lot of students prefer to avoid, of course, because it does need to be paid back. So oftentimes students may have access to educational loans through financial institutions in their home country, or maybe through the government that offers different types of student loan opportunities to fund education abroad. But typically these funds do need to be paid back eventually. And I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but for for international students to qualify for a US student loan, they do need to have a co-signer who's either a US citizen or a US permanent resident currently living in the United States to sign that loan on their behalf, saying that they will take full responsibility if the student is unable to pay that back. So in some cases, international students are lucky enough to have those financial representatives in the US who can sign off on student loans, but more often than not, it's not available to them without that co-signer. So keep that in mind. And then these types of awards with scholarships and grants, as I want to just touch on how they can be awarded and considerations for them. So there's different types of awards that universities and colleges will give for financial aid. Of course, the most common would be merit-based, where the student would qualify for scholarships based on their academic grades from either their high school, or if they're transferring from a college or university and they're high achieving student with strong grades and strong test scores, they typically would qualify for some form of merit-based scholarship, depending on what's available at that institution. Then there are need-based scholarships as well. And each university in the US has different measures of financial need. In some cases, universities will require students to fill out the CSS financial aid profile through College Board, which is a lengthy application profile that students can fill out, but it indicates their financial ability to fund their education in the US. So some students or some universities will use that CSS profile to determine if a student has high financial need or not. In other cases, universities have their own application form for financial need that the student can indicate it on the application, or they'll submit some other application to be considered for financial need. So some universities will be what's called need aware, where the student can indicate their level of financial need, and the university can find scholarship opportunities for that student because they're aware that that student needs financial aid in order to fund their education. Some institutions award scholarships that are need blind, meaning they don't take the student's financial ability to fund their education into consideration for scholarships. So typically they would just be looking at the student's application profile or their application for the scholarship, but not taking into consideration any financial need application. And then unmet need, this is just kind of terminology that you might hear when you might be working with a financial aid office at a university. Unmet need would be the difference between what the student can pay and the remaining cost to attend the university, or it could be what the student is receiving in their financial aid package and the remaining cost to cover their education. So that unmet need is that gap between what the student is able to pay and the remaining costs to fully fund their education. So hopefully that helps a little bit with some terminology and the different factors that go into scholarships and grants consideration at universities. For scholarships, this of course is the most common type of funding, especially for undergraduate students, that is available for scholarships and grants. And scholarships can be offered at different points through the application and admission process. Some universities will give automatic consideration for a scholarship at the point of admission. So when the admissions committee reviews their application, if they're a high achieving student or they've indicated financial need on their application, they may be offered a scholarship automatically as part of their admission package. Other times, students will need to apply directly for scholarships after they have been accepted to the university. They'll have a process of different scholarships that they can apply for once that admission is offered. Then other institutions offer guaranteed scholarships, meaning if a student is accepted to the institution, they are guaranteed a scholarship for that institution. There's no additional application, and there may not be a limit to the number of scholarships that are given out. As an example, Minnesota State Mankato is one of those institutions that offers a guaranteed scholarship. So we automatically award a 40% scholarship to every international undergraduate student who is accepted to the university. So the only requirement is to be admitted, and they'll receive that guaranteed scholarship. And then of course, scholarships, like I mentioned, are based on financial need profiles as well. So it's really important if students are looking for scholarships to pay attention not only to admission deadlines, but also to scholarship deadlines. Some universities will have priority deadlines for scholarship consideration, so they need to apply early to even be considered for scholarships. So they might be able to get admission later on, but at that point, the scholarship awards, there might not be anything left for them to apply for later on. So apply early. That is the most important thing that we can emphasize if students are looking for that financial aid. And then just really quickly, thinking or looking through some of the different types of scholarships that are available, not just through the university, but external scholarships as well. There are, of course, the merit-based scholarships, like I mentioned, that are based on academic achievement. So the student is a high academic achiever with strong academic grades and test scores and could be considered for that merit-based scholarship. Need-based, of course, would be based on their financial need profile. Then there are country and regional specific scholarships. This could be through the university or through an external source. So some universities may be looking to diversify their international student population and have donors who have given scholarships for specific populations of students applying from different countries or different regions to encourage more students to come from those locations. So universities may have those scholarships available. And sometimes there's external interest groups that also provide scholarships. The Rotary Club, for example, is a good example in the United States of a nonprofit organization that provides scholarship funding for students coming from different countries as well. Then government funded scholarships, these are for students who are able to apply and receive scholarship funding from their home country government. Typically, this is managed by the Ministry of Education in their home country, but they would apply to that completely separate from the university. Oftentimes for government scholarships, They want to see that the student is first accepted to a US institution before they can apply for that scholarship, or at least have some form of conditional acceptance. But of course, those requirements will be specific to the students that you're advising, depending on which country and region you're coming from. Privately funded scholarships, again, this could be through the university or through an external source, but generally this would be through a nonprofit organization or an NGO or private donors to the university offering scholarships for students. Diversity scholarships, in some cases, this could be similar to the country and regional specific scholarships, but it's geared towards students or for universities and colleges that want to diversify their student population. So it could be open to international students, but it also could be open to permanent residents or other individuals who have an immigrant status to the US and they're just looking to diversify the types of students represented on their institution. Athletic scholarships, these scholarships are typically available for institutions that have NCAA Division One and Two sports on their campus. So Minnesota State Mankato, for example, we have both NCAA Division One and Two sports on our campus. So we're able to offer scholarships, but of course these scholarships go to top students who are highly skilled in the sport that they compete in. Oftentimes, athletic recruiters from the universities are already doing scouting internationally for the students that they want to consider for an athletic scholarship or consider recruiting to the athletic team. But of course, the world is a big place and athletic recruiters can't go everywhere and know of every athletic student. So if you have a student who is one of the top performers in a sport and wants to be considered for an athletic scholarship, oftentimes the university's athletic department will have a recruitment process where students could self-report their statistics and their scores to the coaches to possibly be considered for recruitment to the team or be considered for a scholarship. And then departmental scholarships. This is typically available through academic departments at a university or college campus. So it's specific to students applying for certain majors. So if a student is applying to a STEM program and there's a STEM scholarship available, it would only be for students in that program. The same for students applying for arts and humanities. There might be scholarship funding available that's only for students studying in those programs. So that is a brief overview. Of course, every institution in the United States has their own process and unique scholarships. So it is a really good idea to connect with admission counselors if you're working on behalf of a student to get the most current information for that campus.
Beth, could I just hop in here for one
Yeah.
second? Yeah, I would also just like to mention sometimes what a first year student can receive in scholarship funding may be slightly different than what a returning student could apply for as well. So, as Beth mentioned, at our university, the first year, when they're admitted, they automatically get our International Maverick Scholarship. So, that's what's available to them, and it remains available to them throughout their entire career. But then once they've been at our university for a year, they can begin to apply for other merit-based scholarships. And I know this seems intuitive, but I think it's important to remind students that what they're paying the first year could potentially be less in future years if they're a high academic achieving student, or maybe they would do research and then get some research funding scholarship later on. So it's not only important to look at those automatic scholarships, but potentially what the student could get later on as well. And admission counselors are usually pretty good about being honest with that. So it's a good question to ask.
Awesome. Thanks, Alyssa. I just wanted to put up a couple financial aid resources here for you as well to look through for yourself or to share with your students, of course. But these are some institutions, financial institutions that oftentimes award scholarships for students or at least have scholarship search platforms where students can do a little bit more research about general scholarships or scholarships available through specific institutions. So the Institute of International Education, this is the organization that manages the Fulbright scholarship, as well as many other scholarships that you may have heard of that tend to be government or nonprofit funded. Then Education USA. This is a resource if you haven't heard of, I highly recommend looking into. Education USA is funded through the US Department of State and provides free education advising services for international students in their home country thinking about applying to the United States. So they can offer advising from the research stage where students might be just looking for institutions in the United States and not really sure where to begin, all the way up to visa advising when the student is thinking about going for their visa appointment, as well as pre-departure orientations when the student is ready to enroll and travel to the US to start their program. So Education USA is great. I highly recommend checking out their services and also looking to them for any scholarship information specific to the country that you're currently in. The hashtag You Are Welcome Here scholarship, this was actually a social media campaign scholarship that came out in 2016 just to encourage students applying to the United States, letting them know that they are indeed welcome here. And so this scholarship has been represented on a number of universities around the United States, and it covers up to 50% of the tuition, and it is renewable. So you can actually go to the hashtag You Are Welcome Here. You can just search You Are Welcome Here scholarship on Google and find all the participating universities and colleges that offer that 50% scholarship. NAFSA, they have a financial aid section on their website as well for international students. This is a professional association for international advisors in the United States, but they have great resources for international student scholarships and financial aid. College Board, of course, hosts the CSS profile and has financial aid information as well. Internationalstudent.com, studyusa.com. And then each university, of course, will also offer their own scholarship database or search tool. So for example, Minnesota State Mankato, we have a scholarship search engine on our specific to scholarships for students at MNSU, and most other universities will have something similar for students to search institution scholarships as well. And then at the bottom here, this link.mnsu.edu/international scholarships, if you actually copy that into your search bar, it will take you to another resource that just has a list of scholarship platforms that you can share with your students about where to find different types of scholarships. Because I know that's always the question is, where do you even look and start that process? So this is a website that kind of consolidates all of those different search platforms into one place. So I want to transition and talk a little bit about managing expectations of your students also, because this is really important when students are applying to any university institution, but especially in the United States, of scholarships specifically. So when every student that comes to the US, of course, wants a scholarship, and every university would love to be able to give a scholarship to every student. Unfortunately, we just don't have the funding capacity to do that, which is why scholarships are, of course, competitive. So we need to pick the top students who seem to deserve the most funding based on various criteria. And so it's really important when you're working with your students to encourage them to do a self-assessment. So think about, why do they deserve funding and what makes them a competitive candidate for applying for scholarships? What sets them apart from other students who would be applying for the same programs at the same university? What sets them apart from their peers? So they can do this kind of inventory and self-assessment about the types of distinctions, accolades, or awards that they may have received during their time in their secondary education, any leadership qualities that they might possess. Maybe they've been participating in a nonprofit organization and doing volunteer experience. Maybe they've been in student government or the captain on their athletic club. But think through some of these different leadership qualities that they may have developed that could potentially set them apart from other students for scholarships. It's important that students do have clear academic and professional goals. This is going to be very important when the student is applying for actual scholarships that require a personal statement. So they want to make sure that they indicate what their academic and professional goals are in that personal statement as well. If they have any specialized skills or training that they can contribute to their program and include in their application, this could also help. So this could be language skills or unique experiences. Maybe they've already had a study abroad experience that they want to touch on in their personal statement. Some kind of skill that could also set them apart is important to notate. And then if a student has specific research goals, especially at the undergraduate level, this can be really interesting to the admission officers or to the scholarship review committee. If that student already knows that they have a problem that they want to do research around and try to find a solution. So this can be something that makes your students be set apart, as well as their interest in research at the undergraduate or even graduate levels. And then just kind of thinking through other expectations as well. Full scholarships at universities are incredibly rare. There are more than 4,500 colleges and universities in the United States, and most are unable to provide a full scholarship that covers everything. We do our best to cover a portion of the cost of attendance, but those full scholarships are rare and they are competitive. So not to discourage students from applying for them, but just manage those expectations.
Yeah,
And then of course, oh yeah, jump in.
oh, sorry.
No, you're good.
I mean, I know that students are often looking for full scholarships, but I also warn students to read the fine print. So many of the full scholarships that are available at institutions are tuition full scholarships, right? So depending on where the university is, housing and living expenses may be really high. Or if they have to live on campus, that could be also an additional expense that maybe they're not ready for. So really looking at the full picture is what I try and get students to think about. Like, yes, okay, this may be a full ride scholarship and your tuition is taken care of, but what are you still, as Beth is talking about, what are you still expected to actually contribute to it? And so, for students who want to come to the US and they are on a very strict budget, I always say maybe instead of looking at California or New York, you look at somewhere like Minnesota or Iowa or even Texas, Louisiana, some of those more affordable places to live. So I just always like to bring that up with full scholarships. It sounds awesome, but sometimes, it's not always the best deal for students.
That was perfect. Exactly. Um, as you're going through that advising process as well with students, I know oftentimes you'll have conversations with their parents or their guardians as well. And it's really good to encourage your students, or if you're put in the position to have the discussion with the student and the parents, have an honest conversation with the financial sponsor about financing education in the United States. So it is a really important thing for the parents or whoever the financial sponsor is to have that conversation with their students about what is a realistic budget for their university costs, what they can afford, not without funding. So it's good to budget that out, to plan that out, and think through the 4 years of education in the US that the student needs to cover, and have those conversations early so that the student can manage their expectations while they are applying to universities and colleges as well. Encourage your students also to apply broadly. This is both in the sense of institutions that are reach institutions, where they might be a competitive university or college for the student to get into, or they might be a reach institution in terms of finances. It could be a university that the student could easily get accepted to, but the cost of attendance is out of the student's budget. And so it would be a reach institution in that case. So apply broadly to the students' top pick institutions, those reach institutions, but also affordable options, just like Alyssa was saying. We know students love to go to the coasts on East Coast and West Coast campuses, but cost of living is incredibly expensive in those places. So while the students should certainly apply to those institutions, because you never know the type of financial aid they might get, encourage them to apply broadly across the United States too, to different types of institutions that might be within their budget. And then also managing expectations. We do get this question a lot, and I'll touch more on this in a couple slides also, but working on campus is an option for international students in the US. So they are able to work part-time on campus during their university studies, but this is not enough money. They will not earn enough money to cover their cost of attendance. And so it's really important to manage those expectations as well. The money that they earn is essentially pocket money that they can use to pay for other personal expenses, but it really won't cover the majority of the tuition and fees or their living expenses. So that's something to keep in mind as well. All right, so understanding university costs, I just want to give an overview of what the estimated cost of attendance is based on for students, and talking about the I-20 and a little bit about the visa process as well. So throughout, at some point during the application process to the university or after admission, the student is required to show proof of funding of how they plan to pay for their education in the United States. This is a requirement for the immigration document that we send to students, which is called the I-20. They need that I-20 document to eventually apply for their student visa, and they need to bring the same documents showing how they will pay for their education in the United States to their visa appointment. So these financial documents are very important. And those financial documents can be a combination of different sources of funding. They could be bank statements from whoever the financial sponsor is. It could be scholarship award letters if they're receiving a scholarship or grant. It could also be student loan offers from different financial institutions. But essentially, the combination of those documents needs to cover the full estimated cost of attendance at the university that is indicated on the I-20. So what's on the I-20 is going to be the tuition and fees, living expenses or room and board, health insurance, and then also some miscellaneous expenses. This is typically what's included in the university estimated cost of attendance. And most institutions have an academic year of 9 months of study. This could be equivalent to 2 semesters or 4 quarters. So the estimated cost of attendance may not even be for the full 12-month calendar year, but just for those 9 months of study. But of course, that will be indicated on the I-20 as well. So this little screenshot down at the bottom is an example of the financial section of what it looks like on the I-20. So on that left-hand side, you'll see these are the fixed university expenses for tuition fees, living expenses. If the student has dependents that they might be bringing with them, that can be factored in here as well. And then also insurance, books, and supplies for their courses. So that's the university fixed cost. And then the student's source of funding is indicated on the right. So it can show if the student is contributing any personal funds, if they're receiving a scholarship, what that scholarship is from. And if that scholarship doesn't cover the full amount, what are the other sources that the student is receiving funding from? So in this case, the student received a partial scholarship from Minnesota State Mankato, and the remaining portion to make up that $31,000 was through their financial sponsor. So if you haven't seen an I-20 before, that's kind of what that looks like. But it is important to make sure that students understand what goes into the estimated cost of attendance and how those are determined. And then one kind of quick tip as well for students and for parents thinking about paying for their education. Generally, universities and colleges only bill students for the term that they're enrolled in. Very rarely would they have to pay for the full academic year of enrollment. So it's usually term by term based on the student's registration in their courses. This could be different if the student is living on campus. In some cases, students might see the full bill for the term that they're living in the dormitories and have to pay that. But that can hopefully provide some relief that this fixed cost doesn't have to be paid all at one time. It's broken up into the terms that the student is enrolled in. So keep that in mind as well, because I know that sticker shock can be overwhelming sometimes for students and their families. All right. This is kind of touching on what Alyssa mentioned earlier as well about opportunities for financial resources after enrolling. If students don't get the financial aid package that they were hoping for their first year, encourage them not to worry. There are many opportunities to apply for additional funding and scholarships or other financial resources later on during their program. So of course, there's additional scholarships that are specific for enrolled students. This is the same at Minnesota State Mankato. We have scholarships that are only for current students attending MSU. They are not for new students. So we want to make sure that we retain the students who are on our campus. Typically, these scholarships are academic or merit-based scholarships. Some might be leadership scholarships. Some are research, grants. So there's different types of funding available for our enrolled students. Then, of course, on-campus employment. Like I mentioned, this is part-time employment that students can qualify for who are studying on the student visa. They can work up to 20 hours per week. But in general, this is just going to be pocket money that students can use for personal expenses to buy clothes or food or entertainment or transportation, things like that. But typically not enough, they would not earn enough to cover the cost of living and the cost of tuition. Off-campus work authorization is something that's also available to current international students who are studying on a student visa. This would be in the form of CPT, which is curricular practical training for students who receive an internship that is off campus. So these internships could be paid or unpaid. Hopefully in the student's case, it's a paid internship, but they would get that work authorization to participate in that off-campus internship and work at that internship location. OPT, this is optional practical training, which is available for students after they have completed their program. They apply for it and can receive work authorization for up to 12 months after their program, where they can work at a job or an internship that's directly related to their program of study. Students who are thinking about going into STEM programs can apply for an additional 2 years of extension. So they could be, excuse me, in the United States for a total of 3 years with work authorization after completion of their program. And then economic hardship, this is something I'll mention here because it is available, and it's important to note that these options are available for students who are facing economic uncertainty. This is work authorization for students typically who are close to completion of their program, so maybe in their 3rd or 4th year, and for whatever reason, their financial source of funding has gone away. So let's say that a family member who is supporting them lost their job and is no longer able to support them in the United States to fund their education. That student could apply for economic hardship. This, of course, was something that was available for students during the past year with COVID-19, with a lot of uncertainty from financial sponsors. So there are measures in place for current students who might have a significant change to their source of funding for economic hardship, but it's not something that we generally encourage students to apply for unless it's an absolute last resort. Then there are what are called resident assistants or community advisors, depending on the university the student is attending. They're called RAs or CAs. These are the dormitory advisors where the students actually live in a dormitory and oversee undergraduate students. But this is a great job that students can apply for at different universities and college campuses that have dormitory housing. So it generally provides a free dormitory for that student to live in and covers the cost of living and the cost of meal plans for students. So this can be a huge cost savings for students who are looking for employment, and it provides that free living. So that's something unique to encourage your students after they've been enrolled to consider applying for. Then, of course, assistantships. This could be research assistantships for students. In some cases, these are available for undergraduate students who are currently enrolled to work as a research assistant to faculty mentors with ongoing research at the university. It's also available for graduate students as well, in the form of graduate assistantships, teaching assistantships, or research assistantships. Then emergency grants, this is something that a lot of universities actually developed and implemented as a result of COVID-19 in the past year during the pandemic, when a lot of students were facing economic uncertainty and unable to pay their bills, or were having difficulty paying rent or other circumstances. Many institutions developed emergency grants that students could apply for small micro grants that would get them by until they were able to work out their source of funding. So that's something that I'm really proud of our university for developing, and a lot of other campuses, to show support specifically for international students to make sure that they can continue their education in the United States. And then, of course, this is something we, of course, want to highlight our food pantries, because we understand, especially after this last year, when there can be so much uncertainty, there's resources for students who, are facing economic uncertainty. There's food pantries available for students to get basic supplies, basic food, if that would be the case in the future, if they would hit a gap in economic hardship and not able to pay for the basic necessities in the United States. Of course, we hope that is not the case for students, but it has been the reality for a lot of students in the past year. And so we want to encourage you that the US as a whole is a great place for student support for international students. And so emergency grants and food pantries are something a lot of campuses stepped up to offer for all of their students who are facing economic uncertainty, like we learned from this last year. So generally speaking, when students are thinking about actually paying for their education at the university or college, there's different ways of making those payments per term. So this could be an enrollment deposit that some universities require students to prepay before they can enroll. Minnesota State Mankato at this time does not require an enrollment deposit, but some institutions do require that in order to secure their registration in the courses before the student can register for classes for that semester. And then when they're actually paying their bill, most universities and colleges accept many different payment types, depending on where the student is applying from or coming from. We know that different countries have different restrictions about wire transfers or credit card payments or bank transfers. So many universities are able to accommodate students who might be facing financial restrictions of getting money from their home country to the United States to pay their bill. So there's different options such as wire transfers. Flywire is a third-party organization that many universities work with, similar to a wire transfer, but they can kind of go through a third-party source, kind of similar to PayPal, if you've ever used that before, but we use that. There's bank transfers as well. If the student has set up a US bank account, they can do automatic bank transfers. And then, of course, there are payment plans as well. So I mentioned that students are typically billed per term that they're enrolled. And during that term, students can actually enroll in different payment plans to break down those payments into smaller chunks. And oftentimes that really helps the student and the family or financial sponsor to not be overwhelmed by having to pay everything at the start of the term, but be able to pay it over time during the semester or the quarter. So definitely talk with the university about payment plan options for the students. So I know that was a lot of information, general information about our universities and financial resources for students applying in the United States. And I'll be wrapping it up here, and we'll take questions and answers for the remaining time. But I do just want to highlight and give you an overview of Minnesota State University Mankato. So again, if you're not familiar with where we're located, we're in the north central part of the United States. We do border Canada. We have 4 beautiful seasons. Right now it's winter, so yes, it is cold and there's lots of snow, but we balance it out with beautiful springs, summers, and autumn seasons. And education in the US or education in Minnesota is just, it's a great place for students to come and study. The quality of living is very high. It's a beautiful state. It's very safe. It's relatively quiet and just a great place for students to build community and to get a very traditional American university experience. We are a mid-sized campus with about 14,000 students and enroll around our students from around 95 countries on our campus. So we're really proud of the diversity that students bring. And then, of course, with our degree programs, we do have more than 130 bachelor degrees and more than 80 graduate and doctoral programs. So whether you're students or even maybe yourself are thinking about going on for a graduate program, there's options available for you. I mentioned that we have a guaranteed scholarship at our campus. It's called the International Maverick Scholarship. This is guaranteed to every undergraduate international student who's accepted to the university. So it is an automatic 40% scholarship that's applied towards their tuition and fees. So the only requirement is for them to get admission to MNSU, and then they can renew that scholarship each year by maintaining a specific grade point average and also participating in some volunteer experiences. And so it's been a really great scholarship resource for many of our students to participate in. And then just highlighting graduate assistantships on our campus. We actually offer around 25% of our graduate students assistantship funding. So again, if you have students that are considering graduate level study, could be a great resource for them to help cover the cost of education. But overall, we are an affordable institution with our scholarships. Our average annual cost of attendance with scholarship is around $25,000 per academic year, including the tuition and living expenses. And then, of course, once students are on campus, they can apply for additional scholarship funding as well. So with that brief overview, I'm just going to put up our contact information for our main office, which is the Carney Center for International Student Services, where Alyssa and I both are based out of. And then also here, just to highlight, if you're advising undergraduate students, we do have an undergraduate application fee waiver right now. The INTL MAV, this is a promo code that students can use when they are applying for admission to the university. It's on our e-application. So feel free to note that and share it with any of your students that you may be working with as well. So again, I know I talked a lot. I know that's a lot of information. So now I want to hear from you if you have any specific questions or any additional scholarship resources that you may have come in contact with that we might not yet be aware of. We would love to have that discussion with you.
While we're waiting for any questions that come in, I would also love to just put a plug in for our social media. We all know students do not always listen to us as professionals, right? And some of them like to hear things from students. So on our Instagram account, actually, we have a student giving some sort of tip almost every day. This week, we are working on providing job interview tips for those international students searching for jobs, like an internship in the US right now. So we do put a lot of great stuff on there that whether students want to come to our university or others, it's good tips. All right. Yeah, so there's a question about the fee waiver. We always want students to have that fee waived. And even if they forget to put that fee waiver in, you can email either Beth and I or me, and we'll take care of it. We'll get it waived manually. Awesome. Well, if there are any other questions, always feel free to email us. I hope you learned a lot from Elizabeth today. She's an awesome resource. And actually, Elizabeth has been doing webinars for different EducationUSA centers, and we're always happy to come into your school virtually and just talk as well. Do you have anything to add about that option, Elizabeth?
Yes, definitely. There's a lot of free resources, of course, as you are aware right now for virtual fairs and sessions. And I love working with Education USA. So regardless of which country you're in, look up the nearest advising center and see if you can get in contact with one of the advisors. They oftentimes have many free virtual webinars for students representing many different institutions in the United States. Um, but like Alyssa said, if you are interested in having us present to your school, or to your students or their families for any virtual event, we would be happy to do so and cover any specific information you think would be relevant to your students and their families. So do let us know if that's something that's of interest to you, and we would love to set that up.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for joining us this morning. We know that you're really busy, and so to take this time out, I know cannot always be very easy. So thanks for joining us. And again, elizabeth.lawrence@mnsu.edu or alyssa.morrison@mnsu.edu. You can always email us. We will try to get back to you within 24 to 48 hours. So, all right.
Thank you
Enjoy
all
the
so
rest of your-
much.
Yeah.
Take care, everyone. Thanks, Alyssa.
Yep. Bye-bye.